that there is as much reason for optimism as he suggests in a recent piece that he wrote, which was very good over at Forbes. We're talking hope, growth, and opportunity. Steve Forbes, always happy. I appreciate it. But, is there a real assessment of the threats that lie ahead? Just because America's epitaph has been written before and needed to be unwritten doesn't mean that every time it's written will be erroneously so. Well, let's hear John Tamny out. John, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, you picked up on this piece that we talked about on the show from Andrew Mikta over at the George Marshall Center for Security Studies. Op-ed he wrote in the Wall Street Journal about the American experiment being on life support. And you suggest that the fatalism that is surrounding America right now, and including in Trump world because of concern about the election not going President Trump's way, is overstated, that we shouldn't be so fatalistic, that America will bounce back from the challenges she faces presently and even a Biden presidency if that comes to pass.
Yeah, without question. We always seem to want to say, well, this time is different, this time signals the end. Let's never forget we've been having these conversations before. Think about Cal Berkeley in the 1960s, kind of the flower bed of campus liberalism, allegedly. But according to Stephen Hayward, the author of The Age of Reagan, a conservative in good standing, the percentage of kids on campus who were like this, that were the fringe, was under 5%. Most kids were there looking for a job, but the media tend to focus on this one aspect of it, and people on our side cherry pick it and say, see. Well, they've been saying this forever. College campuses have always been left-wing. I would suggest that it's actually a bullish sign. In a country where there's lots of freedom for people to be really stupid, yet still be fed and clothed and live good lives, it's probably a sign of immense prosperity. I'm not defending it, but I don't think that what's always been complained about suddenly signals the end of the United States.
All right, let me argue the other side and give you a data point to consider. The presidential vote total, this is from our friend Brian Westbury, First Trust. Presidential vote total in the 7 counties surrounding Washington, D.C., where most federal workers live. That would be Montgomery, Prince George's, and Charles in Maryland, Loudoun, Arlington, Prince William, Fairfax in Virginia. 75-25 Biden to Trump. It's the ruling class's court, if you will. And I use that by way of saying, over time, generations, what you have is an institutionalized class, and they protect themselves by, as you well know, conferring benefits to some and imposing responsibilities on others. And at some point in states like, Illinois, where those on the public charge, as it were, outnumber those privately supporting them, you have a real fundamental problem, and you have an insulated political ruling class, and that cannot stand in a free and still have a free society.
Certainly, I'm not going to defend it. I would point out what you already know in regard to the other night's vote. Republicans have had control of Washington quite a bit over the last 25 years. But what's been the consistent thing? Government has grown here.
Yeah.
And so I've always said, is it a liberal media, or do some of the media support the style of the other side, and do we support our style? Really, what difference does it make? To some degree, whether it's Republican or Democrat, the size of government continues to grow. One of the things I've written for a long time is this is where the supply siders get it wrong. They say, well, if we just cut taxes, we'll get you higher revenues. Well, that's true. But it's a disaster because year one in Washington morphs into $10 down the line, because once you start a program, it grows and grows. And you start conferring benefits on these protected people in these counties in the way that you described. So,
well, I know, but you're making my point for me. I'm not talking Republican versus Democrat. I'm saying that, to borrow a phrase from John Cass here in Chicago about Illinois, I'm talking about a bipartisan combine. I'm talking about a bipartisan ruling class. And that's the death of a free society.
Yeah, there's certainly an argument for that, but I would say even then, capitalism always outruns it. And I think we've seen that for quite some time. Entrepreneurs look at these guys and they work around them. Am I supporting it? No way. I'm a libertarian. In my perfect world, we would cut taxes so low that revenues would actually decline. And in my perfect world, we'd get back to the founders' design of if Chicago wants to be corrupt, let it be. If Texas wants very little government, let it be. So I'm not defending it, but I also think there's a tendency to say, well, this time is different. The world is really getting awful. The U.S. is getting awful. Look, people have been having these complaints about government for the longest time. Yet the only constant in the U.S. is progress, and I think to say that we know now, if you know something now, let's go out and raise some big money because we could make a fortune on the decline in the United States.
Well, I hear what you're saying, but I would just say that I think the idea that the most recent point in time is necessarily the most advanced point in time is something that I reject. I don't think that's true, and I think there's plenty of examples to point to that. I mean, there's one thing to talk, and even just talking about it strictly in economic terms, in terms of how free we are as a free people in America, sort of working from the Hayekian formulation of to be controlled in your economic pursuits is to be controlled in everything. We were much less controlled in our economic pursuits in this country 100 years ago than we are today, for example. So the idea we're always making progress, no, I don't think that's true. And by the way, it is just worth noting some historical examples. The Roman Republic did fall. So I know it was rumored to fall well before it fall, but then it ultimately did fall. And I'm not cheerleading for it, and I'm not saying it's going to happen either. I'm just saying I think the threat is more present than it's been, even going back to the 60s or other trials and tribulations in American history, like the Civil War, for example.
It's possible you're right. I would just say to you in return that the same things, the same rhetoric about how the threat is greater now than it was in the past, that's always been said. People have always been worried about the decline. If you look at market signals, something different is revealing itself. 40 years ago, it cost the U.S. Treasury 11% to borrow. Now it's under 1%. Again, I'm not defending it, but market signals suggest that prosperity is not only abundant in the U.S. right now, but it's going to be abundant for quite some time. We always have our market's always priced distant into the future, and the 30-year Treasury says from investors around the world that they think the U.S. is not just booming now, but wow, the future is going to be amazing.
All right, I want to move to something where we all agree, and that's on lockdown policy, and I want to allow time for you to give your customary rant on lockdowns on this show so that we can tape it and share it.
Where do we begin? What a tragedy. When on earth have we ever fought a virus with economic desperation? That on its own is mindless. It's when people are producing great wealth that we produce the resources necessary for scientists and doctors to discover the cures to the things that used to kill us. Economic growth brings disease and virus to its knees, yet the political class chose to bring out economic desperation in response to this virus. Historians will marvel, but let's also remember free people on their own produce essential information. You don't want one size fits all. You want 330 million Americans trying different things. You want people like my wife nagging me constantly to wash my hands and not touching anything in public, but you also want me who can't wait to get out into public. You want young people going out to bars and restaurants and making out and trying everything there because you need to learn how does this virus spread? Because we know from the 1980s, we got AIDS completely wrong. We were saying you could just get it by being in the same room as someone.
It was
Fauci,
airborne.
that's what Fauci reported. Yeah, it was airborne. Fauci reported that, how wrong he was. The NHS in England said 1 in 5 Brits would get AIDS. No, they were not, but we didn't know. And so this time our response to the virus is that we're going to lock down and blind the very people who are trying to find an answer to why this spreads around, assuming they're interested. Everything about it, from beating the virus to the economic growth necessary to beat it, was backwards with the lockdowns.
I wanted to pivot. I mean, we still have pivotal states remaining in play here. And last night in Chicago and big, Democratic cities throughout this nation, they had marches. Here they were calling on President Trump to concede the 2020 election. Everything is boarded up like a hurricane is about to hit. And you wrote an article, which I loved. Why aren't the Democrats hanging their heads in shame when it comes to rioting? Because I don't think Republicans loot. Do you?
They don't. Let's be honest. The deplorables back in 2016, was anyone boarding up their businesses on the possibility that Trump supporters were going to wreck the property of others? Not a chance. Let's call what's true true. Democrats, when they don't get their way, break things. They steal people's property. They wreck the lives, work of people. Where is the outrage? Where's the outrage that this is what their base does? And they'll say, well, no, but that's just our fringe. Oh, really? Well, so if it's your fringe, why hasn't Biden been out in public saying, I reject you and I reject your votes. You have no place in our party. Go somewhere else. And he hasn't done it because he's well aware that it's quite a bit more than fringe. I trash the Republicans weekly because I'm a lifelong Republican and I expect more from them. But what I've seen from the Democrats is a reminder of why I can't be one. Nothing short of despicable that there's been no moral outrage about what their people will do. If Trump had won going away on Tuesday night, cities across the U.S. would be full of broken windows and stolen items, and there is no embarrassment on the part of that party. It is sickening.
And the tweet on this topic that I enjoyed, I can't remember who tweeted it, but it was the idea that, remember decency is on the ballot, and also remember that if you better board up your business just in case the party of decency doesn't get their way.
Oh, that's good.
Right?
That's perfect, Dan.
I mean, and so that's what's happening. And I got to say, too, some going back to the boarding up. So on that's just the logic of this. So you are boarding up, you are forcing the law-abiding to lock down in their home, in their business, and you are turning the streets over to the mob. I mean, that's where we are in America. So now give me an optimistic take on that.
It's hard to say. It's hard to be optimistic about that. There are always going to be things that bother me. In this case, there's a section of society that says we will break things if we don't get our way. If we don't, and to be fair, the Democrats have been doing this for quite some time. Remember all the comments from Democratic officials across the country that we'll talk about ending the lockdowns. We'll talk about reopening the schools after the elections. Basically, they held us hostage to the virus. And so it's hard to be optimistic, but what I think my retort there would be, think back to July 4th in California. California's kind of a left wing, but did you see what was happening among the people? Fireworks going up everywhere after they canceled the fireworks show. I think that there is a growing middle finger going up around the country to the idiot political class.
Peaceful civil disobedience.
Yeah. Well, I think that's right. I think we're seeing it happen with the second round of locking down and prohibiting indoor dining in restaurants. We're seeing that start to happen here in Illinois. So I hope you're right about that, John. John Tamny, editor, RealClearMarket's.com, director of the Center for Economic Freedom at FreedomWorks, author of the book, The End of Work, Why Your Passion Can Become Your Job. John, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The Lou Dobbs Financial Report is brought to you by Signature Bank, helping local businesses succeed. Visit signaturebank.bank for your commercial banking needs.
I'm Lou Dobbs. Former eBay employees indicted in a plot to terrorize critics.